Hi, everybody. Todd Nash, President of Oregon Cattlemen's Association. I have the privilege to be here today with Marianne Cooper from the Farm Bureau. And Marianne, I'm going to turn it over to you for just a little bit to let you introduce yourself and a little bit about what you've done there with Farm Bureau.
Yeah, so I'm Marianne Cooper. I'm the Vice President of Government and Legal Affairs at the Oregon Farm Bureau until the end of this week, and then I'll be moving on. I've been with the Farm Bureau about 8 years now. I come from a ranching family in Central Oregon, grew up in agriculture, and actually worked as an attorney in private practice before coming to the Farm Bureau and eventually becoming our chief lobbyist in Salem, where I work on a number of natural resource issues.
Well, Marianne, you've been a great partner along Farm Bureau as a whole in a lot of issues that we've worked on together, and you'll be greatly missed. Of course, that goes without saying. But I'm going to relay just a little story. I'll try to make it brief, but I don't remember what year it was. Shortly after you came to the Farm Bureau, my son and I, James, we came down to a quarterly meeting at Cattlemen's, and you were giving a presentation on water. And I asked my son, I said, what do you think the chances are we're related to her? And because at that time your last name was Nash, and he didn't think much. And I said, well, you look around the room of the people that we maybe look a little bit alike, and you were the one to me that had that possibility, and end up finding out a few years later that we were indeed fourth cousins, and our great grandfathers were brothers, and so that's been a fun getting to know you as a family member and your family, and the partnership that we've had there. Marianne, I'll digress from all that stuff that probably nobody cares about you and I, but what are some of the highlights, the high points and some of the low points since you've been there at Farm Bureau?
Yeah, so I think for me, some of the highlights have been the spaces, especially early on. My first legislative session was 2015. And obviously my last was this last one in 2022. And I will say, even though I think to a lot of people from the outside, it feels like, the makeup in Salem probably seemed fairly similar during those times. I think a lot of my highlights came from those times in the early years, and I'd say as recently as 2019, where we were really able to find opportunities to get some stuff done. I think of the wolf delisting bill that we worked on in 2016. There's a bill around maintenance of agricultural channels that I did a lot of work on and OCA partnered on in 2019, where we were really able to kind of educate people about some of the issues affecting rural Oregon and find common ground and find solutions that worked and got bipartisan support. And I think really since 2020, and especially things being virtual, that's just been a lot harder to do. And I'm hopeful for everyone in the natural resources circles that after this next election cycle, we'll be able to find more of those opportunities and more ways to just collaborate and educate people and get real things done that can benefit people and kind of move things in a direction where we can find solutions that the urban areas understand and can support, and that actually have a real and meaningful benefit to rural Oregon. And I think there's just been not as many opportunities for that in 2020 and through till this session.
I know it's been tough on some of you guys that have been in the building battling away for us, or the lack of being in the building with COVID and those relationships that broke down. And I remember you testifying virtually on an issue before one of the representatives, and he cut you off a little bit and didn't give you the allotted time that people that weren't even representing a large group like you were for Farm Bureau, and how upset people got over that. My God, he cut Marianne off. That was really a seminal moment there for some in how detached that we really had become.
Yeah, and it was, I say there was challenges and opportunities in the virtual session. I think the challenges were, it was, I mean, for lobbyists, a lot of your job is, somebody may not have the time to hear what you want to say. They may not think it's as important to their day-to-day life. And, in the old days, we would go, hey, they're in this committee and let's go wait in the hall and see if we can grab them and take 5 minutes of their time as they walk back up to the office and tell them the information that we need them to know about this bill or this issue. And that was a lot harder to do in the virtual session. I will say there was some relationships I think that were strengthened there when you had, your champion legislators in the building. There was a lot of calling them and saying, hey, so-and-so won't, return my call, or I can't get a meeting with them. Can you go talk to them on the floor? And can you educate them a little about this issue? And I think that's where for us having those legislators that come from agriculture was so valuable, because we could tell them what the issue was. They're like, oh yeah, I get it. I'll go try to talk to that person. And so it was really helpful to us to have those opportunities. But yeah, I think time management was a lot harder. The committees didn't have their assistants sitting right next to them. And so I think people, would lose track of their time or there was a lot more of that kind of issue where it felt like the meetings were not being managed in a way that allowed, everyone to be heard on some of those core issues. And I think that was, I think a lot of people immediately jumped to, oh, that was intentional. I think some of it was just that, the legislators that ordinarily have the benefit of committee staff sitting next to them saying, here's the list and here's how we should structure this. Those people were in a whole other place from them. And they didn't have that person kind of sitting on their shoulder, helping make sure that things were moving as anticipated. And so it was really challenging. I'm hoping, and I think that we'll be back in person primarily in 2023. And hopefully we keep the aspects of virtual that were positive, like, allowing people to not have to drive 8 hours to testify on something that was important to them, but also overcome some of the things that were less positive, like challenges in committee management.
So why is it important, Marianne, that people that maybe aren't members of Oregon Cattlemen's or Farm Bureau, why is it important for them to be members?
Oh goodness, this is one that I feel like after 8 years here is so near and dear to my heart, because I think that people, and I will tell you, I grew up, I don't think that my family was really members of either organization or involved in either. So it wasn't, a lot of people that are involved in Cattlemen or Farm Bureau, they're like, oh, I grew up around it, I grew up with it. I didn't have that experience. And so I can understand how a lot of people just say, oh, that's so-and-so's deal, that's not mine, right? They're the member, they're the one that gets involved, or, I don't like that politics stuff. But for me, being on the front lines every day, I see how much everyone is affected by policy and how much we need to educate legislators, we need to stay engaged with agencies, we need to stay up on what bills are happening, what policies are coming forward. And as I think fewer and fewer people are joining trade associations, that's a national phenomena across all trade associations. I think you're having fewer people carry the load of, paying for those lobbyists and those professionals that engage for you, but also fewer voices being heard in that arena. And I think it's much easier for people to dismiss, when 100 people show up to a hearing, that's a real impact. When 10 people show up to a hearing, it's less impactful. And so for me, watching it, I realized how much everyone's day-to-day life is affected by the things we engage in. And I've watched as, across the nation, organizations are seeing fewer and fewer people step up and get involved and pay their dues. And I think it's going to eventually cause some, real issues in having the coverage that is needed for the full breadth of what's affecting particularly producers in Oregon, where we live in a state where so many people are disconnected from agriculture. And, we'll read something on the internet and say, oh, that's a great idea. That's a mandate we should put on people. And you need voices to activate and to show up and explain and tell their side of the story. And for me, when I think of, how many more farmers and ranchers there are in Oregon that are involved in trade than are involved in trade associations, I think, man, if we could get even to 50% involvement, let alone 100% involvement, we would have such a stronger voice. We would be able to share and allocate resources so much more effectively. I think for all of us, we're all feeling like there's more things going on than we can possibly engage in. And I think if we had, even 50% of the farming and ranching community involved in a trade association, the coverage opportunities we have would be so much stronger. And I think we'd have such a more powerful voice than we're able to now. We do really well with the resources we have, and we're all grateful for the members we have, but it is so important for people to get involved. And like you said, for me, it's get involved in an organization, look around, see who aligns with what you're looking for and the opportunities you want, and join that organization. Just make sure you're joining one of them, because we all coordinate with each other. We all work together, and it's really important for people to have a voice.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And you said it very well, of course. We partnered with Oregon Hunters Association on matters, but those associations, they have a special status, and I would have never been able to be effective had I not had that platform of Oregon Cattlemen's, and then joining with Farm Bureau and joining with hunters, and whenever we could have that alignment, it made a more powerful voice. One person coming into the building with one opinion representing one individual, it doesn't have the same gravity. And I don't want to dissuade people from being engaged in the process, but get involved in one of these groups. I think it makes that voice, it just amplifies it. So on that, you are extremely proficient in testifying, in writing letters, all of those things. Somebody that maybe feels a little bit intimidated about testifying down in Salem or via Zoom, how important is it that we hear from producers on the ground that are part of our associations when we go to those committee meetings?
I will say, I think the power of every single agricultural association in the state is their grassroots. That's how we're all effective. That's how we, get things done. That's why people pay attention to us. That's why people listen to us when we talk, is they know if they don't, there's 100 farmers or ranchers standing behind saying, hey, we told you what the problem was here. Why didn't you address it? Why didn't you fix it? And if those, 100 farmers and ranchers don't show up, the organizations are infinitely less successful. The biggest thing I would say is, I think a lot of people's intimidation factor is, I don't know the legislative process. I don't know. I'm not a great public speaker. I'm not super comfortable with it. What if they ask me something I don't know the answer to? And what I always tell people is, if you're testifying on something that's going to affect your operation, you are the only expert on that in the room. No one's going to tell you your story isn't true. No one has the ability that, most legislators you're talking to, they don't know an eighth about farming and ranching that any of the members that show up to testify do. And so remember that you are the expert, and speak with that authority, because you have it. And I think a lot of people get very intimidated by, I don't know the process. I don't know how to start. They don't care if you address them correctly. They don't care if, you're nervous, any of that. To me, the nervous adds a factor of, you're authentic and you're there telling your story, even though it scares you. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about farmers and ranchers, is people that consistently show up and tell their story, even though it scares them to have to do so, or they're intimidated, or they don't, and the other fallacy I think people have is no one's listening. You all tell your story. It's then your lobbyist's job to make sure that people hear it, and that the right morsels of that are picked out and shared broadly with a lot of people. And so that first starts with people showing up and telling their story. And I'd say the second thing in comments is, think about it before. What is your point? What's the main thing you want to convey? Write that out first, then explain it a little bit, and then say it again at the end. And that way, if sometimes people can get lost in explanation, because again, they're not the authority on farming and ranching, you all are. And so they may not understand everything you're explaining about the impact, but if you say what you want to say, what do you want them to do? Is it not adopt the rule? Is it not adopt policy? Is it not move the bill forward? Say that up front with a really short statement of why, then offer your big explanation, and then say it again at the end. It's that formula is really that simple, and your point will get across. And so I understand it's really scary. And some people hate public speaking and they hate writing. No one cares if you're a perfect writer. No one cares if you're a perfect speaker, and you are the authority on your own story. No one else can tell your story. And I think that's really important. And I think people forget that. They expect that, oh, they've heard from a million people like me. No, they haven't. They need to hear your story.
Yeah. Well said, Marianne. I couldn't agree more. And we see it a lot of times where lobbyists will get up, they'll present a point, and then somebody will come along with them on the same panel. And you see those legislators move forward, lean forward. They want to hear every word. And it is so meaningful to have that. I think, I know FFA and 4-H are near and dear to your heart. One of the things I think they're missing as a component is a 3-minute speech presented to legislators and formatting that in a way so that we're building up a new generation of people that are comfortable in that format and how to address the legislators and get their points across in a 3-minute speech. Because oftentimes that's what we're limited to.
Yeah.
And in your case, 1 minute.
Contest. We should pitch to the Oregon FFA Association about that being that'd be a really neat contest for somebody to act as legislators and people to present testimony. I agree with you, although I will say that I think some of the best, farmer and rancher testimony that I've heard are people that came up through 4-H and FFA and learned that skill set. It is really important. And I think it's a really, and trust me when I say, my only formal public speaking training, which is basically what I do for a living now, was FFA. Never again. So, don't think that people know more or have better skills than you. If you went through FFA, you are more than prepared to testify in front of the legislature. Yeah,
no doubt about it. Some of the people that I hated speaking behind what was FFA students, my goodness, they show us all up.
They really do.
Yeah. Marianne, any reflections on the last 8 years and just let you have the floor to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, I will say, and I'm, moving on to a lobby role that is outside the agriculture industry. But as you know, Todd, agriculture is near and dear to my heart, and it has been an honor and a privilege in my life to get to represent farmers and ranchers for the last 8 years. I think the biggest things that I would like them to remember are it's so easy for people to and I think our culture right now is breeding kind of an environment of distrust, of nobody cares, that is really inviting people to disengage and to believe that their voice doesn't matter and to go in kind of their silo or their group and stay there and say, hey, my voice doesn't matter. I'd say as somebody who's represented the industry the last 8 years, your voice does matter. And within every association in the state, the decisions are made by those who show up, those who commit time, and those who are willing to kind of go outside their circle, their community, and say, I have a broader part to tell and a broader part to play in helping Oregon agriculture. And I think that I hope that culture that the culture of people getting involved and getting engaged, really we find a way to increase that. One of the things I'm worried about this election cycle, and I hear a lot about from people, is my vote doesn't matter, my voice doesn't matter. And I think that's a feeling that a lot of rural Oregon has after the last 8 years. But I think we are really seeing that, regardless of what happens in the upcoming election, regardless of how things work, I promise that there are people in the legislature who care, who want to hear your story, who want to amplify your voice. And across the aisle, the one thing I think legislators are united on is they really love and support farmers and ranchers. They may not always understand what you need. They may not always understand how their policies affect you. They may get, have pressure from outside organizations to do something that doesn't align with what is best for your farm, your family, your business. But it's up to you to show up and tell that story. And that's the one thing that, I worry about for our whole culture, is it feels like people are disengaging, they're siloing, they're saying it doesn't matter, the deck's stacked, taking my ball and going home. And I think that, the one thing I tell people is don't buy into that. As somebody that works in the state house, it's not some magic formula, where things are always pre-baked from the start. There are some bills and some policies that have such overwhelming support, they're hard to overcome. But even those, there are, quiet champions you may not realize that are like, hey, I'm worried about the impacts here. And those will be the people that when there's an opportunity, they'll stand up and say, hey, I think we need to fix this. And so don't buy into the myth that everything's, pre-baked, your voice doesn't matter, and you shouldn't show up. Get out, vote. If that election doesn't turn out how you like, get out and vote again the next time. That is how policies are made, that is how things work in America. And I just think it's really easy for people to kind of get overwhelmed and disengage from that process. And I think, again, just there's so many cultural factors right now that are inviting that. And I think people need to show up. They need to know their voice matters. They need to get involved in organizations that are amplifying their voice. And don't feel defeated. There's a lot of people that are out there fighting for you, that want to support your businesses and your families being in Oregon. And don't get overwhelmed by, the voices that may scream the loudest that don't seem like they are supportive of that. Because I really think there's a lot of people that want to do good for farmers and ranchers. They just need more information. They just need more education. They just need more voices to show up and tell their story.
Yeah, well said. I'm going to ask one more question and wrap up with that. There is a huge need for advocacy in agriculture. If there's a young person out there that's considering going through that, kind of the same that you did, what advice would you have for them?
So I will say one of the best parts of what I've been able to do the last 8 years is meet with some young people and FFA students that are like, oh man, I want to do what you do when I grow up. And I think the thing I will say is there's a lot of people, and I don't know why people do this, but there's a lot of people that have a gut reaction of like, oh, you can't do that. You can't get into law school. You're not like, a lot of people will tell you you can't do it, or it's not going to work out or whatever. And maybe you'll get there and you'll decide you want your life to go a different way. But if it's something you feel passionate about, don't buy into the myth that, one, you have to pick a path and be on it forever, but two, that, it's not for you. I came from a ranching family in the middle of Central Oregon, 30 miles from town. And I had this mission when I was in high school that I wanted to be a lawyer for farmers and ranchers. And I have been able to do that since I graduated law school in 2010. So I spent the last 12 years doing that, and I loved every minute of it. And yes, I decided it's, for my family and where I am in my life right now, I'm taking a bit of a different path. But it has been an honor and a privilege. And I just think that there's a lot of young people are just told no for no reason other than, I think people think, oh, that seems really complicated, or that seems hard, or like, oh, it's sweet that you have that idea, but you'll never get there. And I think we need to be telling more young people, yes, go for it. Yes, meet with the people. Yes, give it a try. You don't love it. If it's not for you, if it doesn't happen for you, be willing to pivot and find a different path. But if you're passionate about agriculture, there's space for you here. And I do think that there's, I think people are maybe trying to temper expectations or something like that, but there's enough tempering expectations that happens to young people in the world just by virtue of existing in it. And so I hope that everyone in agriculture says, hey, if that's your dream, go for it and tell me how I can support you. And that's what I try to do with students I talk to. Yeah.
And I bet you have been inspired a ton of them over the years. Marianne, we so appreciate you. We so appreciate everything that you've done for agriculture, the partnership that you've had with Cattlemen's, the amount of stuff that you've written that we've been able to sign on to. It's an amazing body of work, and we look forward to you hopefully coming back to agriculture someday. But the healthcare industry got a big win when they got you hired, so congratulations to them, and we look forward to seeing you down there in the building in a different capacity.
Thank you, Todd. And of course, as family, you will still be seeing me and my family most summers. And I will say the best thing about coming from agriculture is I feel like I get to carry all the friendships with me as I go. So, and apparently my dog wanted a cameo. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.